mute them for that reason.
Yeah.
If I could ask everyone to please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now proceed to maybe into our open session. The primary agenda topic for today is budget workshop session number 2, specifically the administrative component. I'll hand it over to Dr. Foster to begin our discourse on that.
Thank you, Mr. Lamena, and I would ask those who have them to use microphones, not necessarily because they're needed in the room, but as we are live streaming the meeting, videotaping and archiving, it will help you be heard by those viewing from remote locations. Welcome to everyone on the board and those members of the CFBAC who were able to join tonight. For those of you viewing from home, we appreciate you participating from your houses. That's excellent. There are a few things that we want to do at this meeting that we weren't able to accomplish at the first. The first general overview meeting was more of an informational discussion from Mrs. Lachlan about the way we intended to host our process this year. But there's some things that I absolutely want to make clear. First of all, we want to take some time at this meeting to kind of introduce ourselves and learn each other's backgrounds and make sure that everyone is aware of the members of the committee and who you are and what knowledge you're bringing to the table and why you're interested. And secondly, I really want you to understand what our intentions are for CFBAC, because I think that might have been somewhat cloudy when last discussed it. There are all different functions in the ways when we form our board committees of what our expectations are, and it's a little different for each committee. The CFBAC is the one where we have a good portion of our community that's committed to participate, and the administration and the board chairs have some pretty high expectations for what we hope to accomplish. There's a reason why this board workshop was scheduled to solely focus on the introductory portion of the budget, the administrative component, and align it with the CFBAC being present. We really do want to take time to analyze our budget, to be as transparent as possible with the numbers that we have, our process, how we got there, and we're looking for candid and honest feedback from members of the CFBAC on ways you feel that we can improve what we put forward to the community so that what we do eventually bring forward meets with success. I think because of the diversity of the roles that you have and the experiences you bring to the table, you're an excellent resource to help the board and the administration to gain insight on what we should expect to see when the budget is more widely shared. We hope that you feel comfortable enough to give us candid feedback. We don't expect you to be a nod and smile committee. We want to dig deep, we want to roll up our sleeves, and we really want to investigate the financials of the district and the proposals that we're making. The caveat, what we're going to share tonight and what we'll share in future workshops is based a bit on hypothetical projections. It is very early in the budget cycle for us to have definitive numbers to present to you. So when we talk about our working draft, please remember that that's what it is. Everything that we discuss can be subject to change depending upon revenue we receive, actual costs that we are able to project beyond the hypotheticals that we're inferring at this time. And the materials that Ms. Laughlin will share, please recall, they're a draft. So when you see it the next time, if there are changes, know that it's because we've been given a more careful look into what we're planning. But we're going to give you all the materials to help you gain as much insight as possible about our budget. We're looking for you to turn that around and give us as much insight as possible at how we think it'll be received by the community at large and where we are. And it's been explained to me that in the past, this committee has been very targeted in things that you've been able to identify that have helped the district to come forward with a more efficient budget plan. So we're hoping for more of the same. All of that said, if at any point you have questions, you have concerns, please do not hesitate to bring them to my attention, bring to Carrie's attention, or the two board chairs of the committee. We want to make sure that this committee is a reflection of what your expectations are as well. So, all of that said, before I turn it over to Mrs. Lachlan, what I think I would like to do is, if you just don't mind, if we go around the tables, everyone kind of introduce themselves to the members of the board and the members of the committee that are here who may not be as familiar, and just a little bit about your background that has led you to be interested in serving.
I'm Julie Benlato.
Hello, I'm Julie Benlato. I was a school board member from 2004 to 2007 and PTA president for almost every school and council president, as well as all the roles over the 18 or 19 years I've lived here. Prior to having my children, I was a senior manager in audit with Ernst & Young and Touche Ross. So obviously my financial background and my involvement in the community is my primary inspiration for staying involved.
My name is Heather Ross. I'm very active in the PTA and numerous Board of Ed committees. This is my second year on the CFBAC. The reason I am involved is I have 4 children in the district, the youngest just in kindergarten, and in the past I was very concerned about Elwood's financial situation, so I wanted to get involved just to learn more about it.
I'm Anne Marie Savage. I have children in Harley. This is the second meeting I'm coming to for the Finance Committee. This is the first year I'm joining it. I'm also joining it because I am very involved in the PTA, and I also was concerned about financial status of Elwood, as we learned a lot about it last year and in years past. I wanted to get more involved so I could understand it better.
I'm Julia Freed, Board Vice President. It's my first year chairing this committee, formerly on nutrition and curriculum. So this is my first year on the CFBAC.
Heather Navalito, Board of Education Trustee. This is the second year that I'm chairing this. I also was when we had chair people on this committee, I was the chairperson on the other side of the table as a community member, and I believe it's about 6 years that I've been on this committee so far.
My name is Matt Curiali. I live here in Elwood for about 9 years. I have 3 boys in the district. I'm a special education teacher myself in New York City. I work with students with autism. I also coach varsity soccer and girls flag football, so I'm inside the education field, so I see everything that's going on on Long Island as well as in other areas of the state. And I wanted to join just because I wanted to become a little involved. My wife was on the PTA for a numerous amount of years, and I guess it's my turn now.
Hello, my name is Nikki Crowley, and I'm currently one of the EMS middle school PTA presidents. I've also been very involved with the endowment over the years. This is my second year on CFBAC, and for many of the same reasons, I just joined to become more familiar with the district's financial picture and budgeting and financial constraints, so forth.
Oh, God. Dina Pirro, I'm president of the Elwood Endowment. I've been involved in the PTA for many years. I joined last year just to really understand the budget process and what some of the issues were, and I actually found it very interesting, so here I am.
Our other 2 audience members are not CFBAC members. Janine and Kathleen are resident parents and members of outside organizations with the district, so they're here just as members of the community to partake in the budget discussion.
And just before I turn it over to you, Carrie, and you certainly will be running the show tonight, I have 2 personal goals for the budget process this year. It's outside of the board goals that have been set and adopted. One is that we accomplish transparency. We want to make sure the community has all the information they feel they need to make an informed vote. We want to make sure that all information that is shared is made available to the entire community so that any questions that do come up can be answered and people can feel secure in the way they are voting for our budget, feeling they have all the knowledge necessary to do so. I think that's the easier one. The other piece is I really want to give this community a year off from a doom and gloom budget scenario. Last year was very difficult for the Elwood School District. I completely understand the rationale for looking for a tax cap piercing budget to help preserve some of the programs, and I know that it was a very difficult result, and the process was not easy for anyone in this room or the community at large. I'd really like to give the community off, but a year off. But I know that there is some skepticism about the positive nature of the conversations we've been having thus far regarding the budget because of how difficult some of our conversations were just a few months ago. So that's the other thing we really need to accomplish, to make sure the community, and not just those who regularly attend these meetings, truly understands what has changed since the spring that puts us in a more favorable financial position. So I think with your help, we can accomplish that goal, but that is a main driving factor of the discussions we need to have. What is different? And there are things that are different. It has to do with back aid that's been due to the district that's beginning to be received. It has to do with the tax cap projecting at a percentage higher than where we were in the spring. There have been some good reductions of expenditures that we're now seeing positive results from. And Ms. Loughlin will take us through all those conversations. But I want to make sure everyone here, board members and committee members, have a good understanding of what's different. Because I have a sense that question is going to be asked quite a bit if we just have a very positive discussion. And my goal, and Ms. Loughlin and I have had a lot of conversations about this, is I would really like to be talking and focusing on what are the enhancements in our program for next year, rather than being faced with conversations about what's being cut, what's being reduced, what do we have to do without. I really would love to be sitting here in March and April making presentations to the community about here's what we're able to enhance within our program for our students. So with your help, hopefully we'll get there, but those are my two personal goals that I wanted to share with all of you. Mrs. Loughlin.
So as Dr. Bossert said, we are going over the administrative component tonight for the proposed 2017-18 budget. Please interrupt me as we go, as we want to have this kind of, a give and take conversation with this presentation. The presentation has been shared with the CFBAC committee members prior to tonight, so you've been fortunate enough to get a preview and hopefully came kind of preloaded with some questions that I will hopefully be able to answer. And if we can't answer tonight, we will certainly follow up with email to the committee to answer those questions. So we're going to do a brief budget overview. What are our budgeting goals and what is a three-part budget? Kind of backtrack a little bit back into some of that training that we've done over the course of last year and a little bit in the first meeting. We are reviewing the administrative component, which is part of one part of the three parts. We're going to look at the large cost drivers for that, and as well as what are the estimated 17-18 budget numbers. And then we're going to talk briefly about revenue, fund balance, and tax cap. Keep in mind, revenue, we really don't know much on at this point. It's very early in the game for a revenue discussion, but we, kind of just want to bring everybody up to speed where we're at with those projections. So as Dr. Bossert said, our budget goals this year is to maintain all of our current programs, have a rollover budget, and maintain the programs we're currently offering. We may be tweaking those programs slightly for enhancements, maybe not offering programs that we are finding low enrollment in, but the essential goal is to keep everything consistent as to what we're currently running in this 16-17 school year. We are on the path to reduce fund balance allocation. It's to be determined if that is feasible. It's to be determined how much that would be reduced, if at all possible. That has been an ongoing discussion since my time here in Elwood, that we're trying to get away from relying on our fund balance to support our programs and to try to bring in other revenue streams in order to support. We're also looking to stay within the proposed tax cap. We don't know what that number is at this point. We will know that number within the next week or so when the CPI for the 2016 year will be released. So again, that's to be determined as to where that is, but we do not have any intention to try to pierce the cap as we did last year unsuccessfully. Our goal is to stay within the tax cap legislation. And it's also to maintain fiscal stability. As you know, our designation now is susceptible to fiscal stress. Last year we were deemed moderate fiscal stress. We have dropped down a category in the positive direction. And our goal is to either at least stabilize that or to reduce it down to be undeclared into any category. As it would be nice to be there, but if we can just maintain our status right now and not go back the other way, would be great as well. So our proposed overall budget, keep in mind these are complete draft numbers at this point. It is very early in the game. We've divulged into the administrative component because a lot of those numbers are hard numbers that we do know at this point in the game. There are some out there that we're still waiting on, but we don't think it's going to tweak that budget, that particular budget, too much at this point. So you can see I put up 2016-17 budget we're working under and the 2017-18 proposed. These are all estimates as of today. We are holding staffing meetings, we're meeting with our building principals, we're meeting with the curriculum department, we're talking with everybody, we're meeting with our transportation company. We're talking to everybody now at this point to try to firm these numbers up. So where you see it's going from a $59.4 million budget to a $60.7 million budget, we do expect those numbers to change and potentially change that drastically to lower that $60.7 million, I believe will come down.
Is this presentation going to be posted online?
It will be posted online tomorrow morning for all people to see.
Can you put draft across that?
Yes,
Or
in that column itself.
something to slide that makes it clear that that's not a definite?
Sure.
Oh, I see, Carrie, it's really small on the bottom.
Well, that's just, it says estimates as
Yeah.
of, so, but I can try to, I'll work on that to try to make it a little bit clearer so that
Right.
it is clear that these are not definitive
Okay.
final numbers being proposed at this time. So as I mentioned, the budget comes in three parts. Legally, we're required to present it to our public within three parts. That's how we operate in the business office, is functioning under three parts. You have your administrative component, your program component, and your capital component. Your program is the largest portion of your budget, and as you can see, it's 76% of our budget. That is all of our instructional programs, our transportation, the teachers, the teaching assistants, the textbooks, the supplies, our BOCES programs, everything we offer to our students, everything that touches our students and their educational enhancement is our program. The administrative component is just that. It's administration, it's the oversight of all the entire district, it's clerical support to the administrators, it is the administrative portion of the BOCES that we have to pay, we're obligated by law to pay, that falls under that category. The software programs that we use, that falls under administration. So there's a lot of key pieces that fall under administration. District insurance, that falls under administration. So there's a lot of areas that fall into that category itself. That's 12% of our budget, projected right now for next year. And then we have the capital component, which is our operations and maintenance of plant. That's all of our custodial maintenance workers, our utility bills, everything that has to do with the actual facilities, the buildings, repairs, the field maintenance, anything like that would fall under there. The district debt, our bond debt we have to pay every year, that falls under capital. So that's 12% as well as our budget. Within all three components, we're dealing with various categories, which are called, in our world, objects. The salaries, benefits as it relates to each of those groups. So the benefits for the administration staff as well as clerical staff for that support, they have benefits that tie to that go in that administrative component. All of our maintenance and custodial staff, their benefits fall in their capital. So that particular line item in the budget gets split three ways based on who that number is tied to. We have contracts, which fall underneath all those categories. As I said, the transportation contract falls under program, but yet the district insurance, which is a contract, falls under administration. Supplies, which is typically one of the smallest numbers of the budget, is just our general supplies. Our office supplies, the supplies for the children, their pens and papers and folders and those type of items, the consumable items that we're replacing every year falls under our supply code. And then we have equipment. Equipment is anything over $500 based on our board policy and the capitalization thresholds. So typically equipment is our computers, our software, not software, the Chromebooks that the children are purchasing, desks, chairs, those things of that like. Sometimes we might buy one desk in a year, it's about $300, that would fall under the supply category. So for that we follow board policy and regulation to determine the classification. So the proposed administrative budget for 2017-18, we are not looking at any administrative staffing increases, we're not looking at any changes in administrative staffing, we're looking to remain steady as to what we're offering this year. And that would be, the last discussion last year was the human resources position, which is vacant right now. In prior years, the superintendent acted in both positions. This year, both myself and the superintendent are overseeing that with a split stipend to oversee those departments based on instructional versus non-instructional. And our goal for next year is to remain in that same model. All professional development programs to remain in place. Teachers College, which is going on at both Harley and Boyd, we're looking to keep that within the budget. And our superintendent conference days, we're looking to keep all those programs that we offer on those days for our teaching staff in place for 17-18. Our security needs for the district, we're looking to keep stable at this point. We will see a slight increase in those line items, but we'll see the revenue on the other side take effect, and that's due to the new building use policy that takes effect July 1st. So that's kind of just a balancing of the budget, but to affect the fact that we are going to see a slight increase in security, which will though be paid for by the outside users. We're assuming at this point a 2% increase in district-wide insurance. We typically receive that number by the end of this month, and that is just the district liability insurance, our general liability that we carry. And we're waiting the final numbers from BOCES. BOCES is anywhere from $3 to $4 million of our budget. There's a lot of programs we go through there. We get 65% of aid back on BOCES. So it's a large portion. We don't have their numbers yet. They're looking to adopt their budget this month. So by February, we will have the numbers to us so that we can start filling out our requests for next year.
Carrie, just for the committee and the public, when do you get your state aid runs? When do you get a better projection of what?
I have that later on in the revenue side, okay? Bear with me. Administrative component, as I said, the two key pieces of it are salaries and benefits. The largest portion of the entire district budget is salary and benefits. We're a service provider. We provide service to our children. All of our staff are paid, obviously, and there's benefits that are tied to it, whether it be their health insurance, dental insurance, life insurance, the payroll taxes, or the retirement system. There's numerous pieces that go to it. So as I said earlier, for the administrative side, all clerical and administrators are included in the salaries for this component of the budget, as well as any substitutes we may budget for our clerical staff. So if our secretaries in the high school are absent, we always do bring in somebody to fill in, so that there's somebody always there to answer the phone, greet parents and greet children. And overtime for any clerical staff, depending on what projects. We do try to keep that at a minimum, but there are times where it is needed, and we do know those times that it's needed, and it is cheaper to pay the overtime than to hire additional staff for that very brief one project deal that we may have once a year. Benefits as it relates to all those groups are included in there. Those are health insurance, dental, life, our long-term disability programs, the retirement system, payroll taxes, Medicare reimbursements for all retirees. In addition to this, any retiree, based on their contractual agreement as when they retired, may be receiving benefits still. While they may be paying into it, district may be picking up some of the costs. It depends on what the agreement was at time of retirement. Anybody that fell into the administrative category at the time of retirement is budgeted for within the administrative category continuously. So we do have retirees that are taken care of. Their Medicare funds that we reimburse, that all falls within the administrative component of the budget. The same goes for any custodial workers, they're falling under the capital. Teachers that are retired are falling into the program. This is just a chart to show you 2016-17 versus 17-18 on the salary and benefit lines, as they are the larger drivers of the budget. For 2017-18 in salaries, we're seeing just about $123,000 increase, and that's a contractual obligation based on settled CBAs that we've just recently settled for some of our staff, as well as projected settlements going forward. It's for administrators, all of our administrative staff, which would be district office staff, our principals, our assistant principals, directors, as well as all of our clerical staff. I would say about 70% of our clerical staff fall in the administrative category, because they're not there physically touching what the children are doing, so they would fall, they're supporting the administration. So that is also tied into this number. And then again, benefits, we're looking at about a $30,000 increase. Again, that's a contractual item, that's negotiated through the CBAs, and that's where that number is projected to be. We have received insurance information and rates at this point. We have received the TRS numbers and ERS numbers. While they did see a slight decline, it's not more than the 2%, which would exempt it from the CPI tax formula. So that slight decrease is helping keeping that number a little bit more stable. So this is just a little bit further of a breakdown of the administrative budget. The salaries, as I said, is administrative and clerical. We're looking at going from 3.6 million to 3.7. Benefits 1.93 to 1.96. Supplies are going down, and that's just basically taking a relook at our supplies and the trend that we've seen. We always do about a 4-year back trend when we're doing a budget work and analysis to see what are we spending. We are purchasing more off of cooperative agreements. we contracted with a program called Ed Data, which is an online bidding program. They bid specifically for us, and as a result has been saving us year to year. First year, I think we saved about $92,000. This past year, we saved about $105,000 in supplies. And so we're continuing to see that savings growth, which we can now start effectuating in the budget process as a result of that. We've been extensively training all of our staff on all of these contracts that are available to us. And as a result of change in policy 2 years ago, we can actually reach more contracts and what we call piggyback other districts, other government agencies to get the best pricing. We're doing that more and more. I have to say our support staff is doing a phenomenal job with that. They are shopping everything out. They're not just taking for granted that the state contract price is the best price. They're looking at other contracts available to them to make sure they are getting the lowest price. They understand the value of the dollar and they understand where we are fiscally, so they're looking at that and trying to do their best to make sure they're saving every penny they can. The contractual line item, it does include the BOCES requirements under the administrative component. And again, like I said, we don't have all of those numbers. Just yesterday we received 2 of the numbers, which were pretty much flat as budget to budget. But everything else is our programs, our software programs, the financial program, the student database system, training programs that we go through them. That all falls under this, and we're awaiting their budget. Equipment, you'll see a decrease in that line item. And that's essentially just based on what we're projecting for next year. We did do some overhaul of office space and desks and purchases. We're not looking at that again. You know, those are typically one-time purchases, so we're not projecting next year on the administrative side to have a large equipment purchase. So again, total administrative budget going from 7.3 million to 7.4. So on the revenue side, there's a lot of unknowns still at this time with the revenue, and it's important to know that as we get through this process, and every month we will start to gain a little bit more insight as to where we are with revenue. A big piece of our revenue is our fund balance. We've been allocating fund balance year to year, which is our savings account in order to support our programs and balance our budget. And that's just strictly because we have no other revenue source. We can't pierce the tax cap, we can't just raise taxes as we wish to support the budget, as has been done in many years past. So for 2015-16, we actually ended up with a successful year, which was not what we had projected earlier towards the end of that year. Our unassigned fund balance ended up at 3.6%, we're allowed the 4%, and we appropriated $500,000 to our retirement reserve. The reason being that is the easiest reserve account to pull money from should we ever need it. That's for our employee retirement system. We can use that money to pay the bill in the following school year. So that's why we put the money into there, as all of our reserves are significantly underfunded. But with conversations with our auditors, we felt that that would be the best spot and the most lucrative spot for us to use. So our total ending fund balance was $5.6 million at the end of 15-16. The projections for these numbers, as I said, did come up higher than what we originally thought. Reason being, when we do our fund balance projection, as anybody does any type of projections in a business they're running, you know where your spending categories are. We know special ed is a liquid code. We have children moving in and out of district continuously, almost on a monthly basis. Programs changing on children. We never know definitively what those costs are going to be until the end of the year and we get final bills. So we always project that we're fully spending those line items. Our capital monies, our maintenance and operation of plan. Those two, we always project we're spending everything because we put in for the worst case scenario, that a boiler is going to go down and we're going to have to use every penny that we have in the budget to support that. So again, we fully allocate our monies out for that. And then there's some other contractual items that, you know, encumbrances were made because there was a thought that we were going to be doing something, prices are coming in less, and as those things accumulated at the closeout of the year, there were surplus monies in there. We also did receive additional state aid in the form of excess cost aid, which is our aid on our special education students, as a result of our staff filings, and we have a group called School aid specialists come in on an annual basis to help us with that and review it. We did see over $100,000 more in state aid come in on that line item itself. So with all those things combined, we actually ended the year on a positive note. 2016-17, based on projections now, yes, Erin?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to back up a minute. Because I know last year we were in such dire straits because we wanted to pierce the cap. we had a very long finance meeting about should we pierce the cap, should we not, and then it agreed that we're not gonna pierce the cap, because we need to do so many cuts in order to continue the program as we were.
Right.
So if I'm reading this correctly, so we say after we were able to pass the budget without piercing the cap, we still ended up being successful?
Correct, we were able to get out of our deficit spending and support our programs as a result of liquidating purchase orders that we had, getting our final bills from our special education needs students, the services that they're receiving our final bills from our BOCES programs. That's another one too, is we know because we sign contracts with BOCES and we make contract amendments throughout the course of the year, but we also know what we typically spend with them. So we try to project those numbers out going forward. So at the time, in April, when we were doing these projections, those are the considerations that get made. We projected the extra $150,000 in capital program was going to be spent because of emergencies could arise. We might need a new roof, we might need a new boiler. You know, so those costs are always assumed to be fully spent. When they're not, that's what's creating the surplus on the other side to benefit us.
Excuse me, Mary Ann, just to clarify too, the budget that was voted on in May didn't impact these numbers, didn't impact the year ended June 30th, 16, that's for this year. So the outcome of the budget did not affect
the fund balance.
The fund balance.
Correct.
At the end of the year.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on the operating results from the prior year actually impact the fund balance leading into the year that we voted on a budget projection for this operating year. Does that make sense?
No, that does. I was just surprised because seemed to be in such financial strains last year that we were able to increase our fund balance. That was really my question of how did that happen?
Correct, and that was a result of some savings on the expenditures, the increased state aid. So all of those things combined, when you have the excess revenue and less expenditures than what was expected, that gives us the surplus, which allows us to then fund some of our reserves.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And I think, nobody is going to, I don't know what to say, put it this way, everyone's happy that we ended up in a better spot than we would. But I think for some of the committee members that went through this process last year, what's concerning is we had, I was looking back at some of my notes, as much of it was a $2 million swing or more from some of the projections that we saw. And granted, that was back in February, March, okay? But I guess I know from my time on the board that, there's usually a budget. I might not have the right names for a budget status report, which shows the budget amount, the encumbered amount, and then what's available. And my concern is, since we had such a large swing, there are some things you can't predict, like, the excess state aid that I'm assuming from the special ed that came in, I guess, from the audit fight.
It's from that and from my staff. We have a staff member that works both with myself and with the special ed office. She's a key player in this. Through this process of having these guys come in, they've been training as well.
Right.
So through that, she has gotten a much better grasp as to what needs to be filed and to file them in a much more timely basis than has ever been done before. So as a result, we have back aid due to us because things weren't filed in such a timely basis. We're now filing them within that guidelines before the databases are getting pulled, which is allowing us to get our money much quicker.
Which
Yes.
is great. So I guess my question is, when we have these runs, is there something that we can look at in, not necessarily on the revenue side, but on our expenditures that are highlighting like, well, here's an area where we're clearly not, haven't encumbered what we were anticipating, and when we're having a budget discussion for the following year, is there a way that we can take that into consideration? So, for example, last year, at a certain point, certainly by, May 1st or even April, you gotta know we're not gonna be spending some of this, and we have an overage here. And we know we never budget down to the dollar. We know there's cushion in the budget. But, it's disturbing to me we're having conversations about cutting things, and maybe we won't do this, and even asking the community to pierce a cap at such a large amount 4 or 5%, which thankfully we didn't do, and we know that, the first round failed. So I want to say to you from the auditor standpoint, do we have some controls in place or procedures that we can fine tune this so when we get to proposing a budget, in May, maybe it's a little bit closer and we can take into account what we think our actual results will be at the end of the year. And I know that's not perfect.
Right, but it is our goal is to get as
Right.
accurate as
But
possible.
I think it should have been, or we hope it's a little bit closer, so if we know we're gonna have a large surplus, we can go, okay, how can we fund that right? Because for
Correct.
example, if we went out with a 4 or 5%, budget, and it passed, we'd probably be in trouble, because now we'd be above the 4%, and then the community would be like, why the heck were you asking us
Correct.
for that? Which you still might get at this point, so
So
I think
we
that's my
have,
concern.
in my office, every year, we look at what happened. We look at what were the projections we put out, here's our final numbers, where are the discrepancies? We do that analysis. I do it on an annual basis once I have those final numbers, so that, because it's a learning process for myself to see where are we going, what can we do going forward? Was it a one-time anomaly that happened that caused it? The state aid now is we're seeing coming quicker. They're actually showing up on my state aid reports where they never have before. So that's a benefit for us now. We do fund balance projections on a monthly basis starting in January, starting with the close of December. So obviously, as you get closer, the goal is to get more accurate. We rely a lot on the buildings to manage their own codes, to manage their own purchase orders. If they know that they're not spending something, and we're sending monthly reminders to them, let us know. Tell us that you don't need that purchase order anymore so we can liquidate it and we know that money's gonna be there. So that it's kind of a culture change also, so that we can get into that more accurate projection. It's educating them so that they have an understanding what they're doing is affecting the total picture. So it's a process, and I think we're slowly getting there. We're seeing improvements each year. When I go through the numbers every month, we do provide the board and the community with the budget appropriation status report, with current year report, what the budget is, what's been adjusted to it with budget transfers, what our encumbrances are, what our expenditures, and what's left. What's left usually shows a large number, and we try to make sure we pick up all encumbrances, such as our debt, our TRS, our ERS. We try to make sure we get those purchase orders in, and we fully encumber that entire budget line, because we don't know when it's going to come in. We don't know what the final salary is, as much as we can try to project that to accuracy. We have a lot of overtime, differentials, timesheet paid people that are not contractual, so therefore they don't get, it's hard to project what their numbers are. Which I have to say, based on the work of my previous treasurer, our payroll projection came in within $60,000. So for that to happen, I was very pleased. I was actually almost shocked because I have never seen that happen, where everything else came up kind of scattered. So we've gotten one area under control now, and that's our largest expense.
Right, I was going to say that's a good one to have.
Right, so we're comfortable with that now, and now that from there, we can start driving it down into the other sections of the budget. As I said, there are liquid areas of the budget. There's the capital expenses, the maintenance of the buildings, and that anything could happen, so we never know, which is why we assume we're going to fully spend those lines. Our equipment money, it's a spend it or lose it type of scenario, so we always assume we're going to fully spend it because we want to make sure we don't lose that money should we go into a contingency. We try to say, okay, come April, we know we have $10,000 left in equipment. Next year, we need to purchase $10,000. Maybe let's get it now, because what if we don't have that budget next year as we're tweaking the budget? So it's those things, it's a process that we're trying to get through. It's a culture change in having everybody in the district understand that everything they do affects the budget. So I think we're on the right path. I hope we're on the right path. I have great staff working for me. Business office has been through quite a few personnel changes in the past couple of years. We're stable now, and I think we're going to get there. The projections as we move forward, the goal is to get as accurate as possible. So I encourage the CFBAC, especially as you get educated through this process, take a look at those budget appropriation status reports. Ask the questions, we're looking at this every day. Sometimes when you start looking at something every day, you miss something. So having that extra set of eyes, my accountant looks at it, my district treasurer looks at it as well. So the three of us are constantly looking at it, and the board as a whole is looking at it on a monthly basis. So we encourage the questions to help us improve the process.
Carrie, if I may, just a point to help clarify your question. The budgeting process has changed dramatically as far as school finances since the tax cap legislation. Our jobs, it's been pros and cons. The major con of the tax cap legislation is we do not have the local flexibility to add to our program at a level that the board and the community may accept, unless we get that 60% vote that we failed to achieve last year. There are many, many things we would like to do to enhance our program, the offerings that we have for our students. But the truth of the matter is we can't afford to do those things and remain under the tax levy cap. That's the major negative. The major positive is it gives us our benchmark for where we know we have to budget. We know that we have a finite amount of money after we've calculated what that true tax levy cap is and what that impact is in our budget. So we don't have to play guesswork with what the community may or may not support. 5 years ago, school administrators had to sit down and try to get a sense and a pulse of the community to say, do you think they'll accept a 3% increase? Do you think we can go to 4%? And there was a lot of reading the tea leaves to see what could be included in the budget. Building the budget this year and in the tax cap era, once you've committed to staying within that cap, which I think this board is very much done, and I'm in full support of remaining within the cap, that will tell us our total dollars that we have available to build the program from. So it kind of takes that level of complexity out of the process. So that's the positive. We will figure out what the tax levy cap is once we have all the information necessary, and what we can afford to do within that cap. The other part that's tricky, and this is, relative to your question, is all we're asking the board to approve and the community to support is that final budget number. That's it. The community is voting yes or no on that final number. But what we talk about for 6 months is the spending plan. And that's the part that's really difficult to do because of how fluid it needs to be as the year progresses. The fact that we began conversations in September of this year for expenses that will begin to incur in July coming up is very difficult to do. And part of the reason for those discrepancies you referred to is you are forced to plan for the worst but hope for the best. And it's really kind of a catch-22 that we explain to the community for this past year. We planned for the best, and some things really turned out very fortunately, and that's what Ms. Lockman is referring to. One of our greatest areas of savings was the special education line, but we would have been very, very foolish to budget to the penny or near the penny for those expenses that we may incur within that department. There are significant expenses associated with providing necessary special education services. We have students that attend our schools that cost $100,000 or more for one student. We need to make sure our budget allows for the flexibility of children of those profound needs to move into our communities. Districts that have failed to do that, it has become very public in their failure. We don't want to put ourselves in that position. Carrie used concrete examples such as the roof leaking or the boiler exploding. We need to make sure we have those monies budgeted. And we did that this past year. And we were fortunate that some of those worst case scenarios didn't occur. So that when we calculated fund balance at the end of the year, those budget lines that had planned for the worst, we received a much better scenario. And that's why we ended up in the position we're in. It's really hard to get that message to be understood by every resident when they pull their yes or no lever. But that's the facts of the case. And again, when I go back to the 2 goals that I set for the process, that's the second piece, having people understand why our position is different, and hoping to be very different when we're talking about our final budget proposal to what our discussions were in the spring.
I guess just to clarify my point is, I guess at some point as we got closer to that May deadline or the April meetings, it would have been nice to hear that, you know what, we plan for this, but we might see positive variances in these expenditure lines.
And the truth
Or
of,
we might end up better, because it's just, $1 million swing, or like I said, we were looking at a $2 million swing. It's a big swing. And again, I don't, with the special ed area, and, I understand it, I remember from my time on the board and other areas. So what I'm saying is, I would hope that from an administrative level, and when you're, have a budget committee, that we have a communication that, we might end up with some positive variances, things might not end up as bad as we thought. So we're hoping that we won't need to cut extra, we won't
Sure.
have a doom and gloom proposal, because, things weren't really looking too cheery back in, March, and that was, really difficult. So-
And your request is certainly reasonable and rational. The truth of the matter is, we weren't able to accurately calculate that fund balance until, Carrie, October? Was it September, October?
September.
September, when we finally closed out the books for the 15-16 school year. So the actual expenses for last school year were final calculations were done in September. And what you just said is very fair. What picture do we have in March and April? But think about how much business is still yet to occur between when we had our final costs determined in September and what our discussions were in March. We will have that same challenge this year, that there will still be a lot of unknowns in our total expenses when we try to forecast fund balance. And in the reports that Mrs. Loughlin provides to the board, fund balance projection can see great variance, as the year progresses. And one of the things I hesitate to do is go to the community and say, great news, ooh, sorry. I would almost prefer to say, we're gonna be real tight, and then the good news is, oh, no, we're not, things turned out better. I would be real hesitant to say, we're gonna have a real positive financial outlook at the end of the year, and then be wrong about that. So it's a very fair question, and it's very rational thinking. It's difficult.
Yeah, I would just say, and this is great discussion, it gets down to the design principles that are informing the approach to the budget. But I think Dr. Bossert has highlighted appropriately, we have a responsibility to operate prudently with a conservative approach that models for the worst, and hopefully your operating results are more positive. I think the point that Mrs. Ballotto is making, which says, how do we get better at seeing earlier positive or negative variance so it can inform projections, is a great point, and I think the business office is working diligently to do that. When I hear about a $60,000 variance on wages, which is our overwhelming largest category, tremendous progress. So I think it's just that process of continuing to work through all the different components to refine that visibility and forecasting. The other point that I would just add is, school budgeting, there's the context of the definition of the year for which we're voting on a budget. But based upon what Dr. Bossert just said and what Ms. Loughlin has said, is there's a rollover aspect of this year's budget and the surplus that's generated from that operating result then having an impact on the following year. So I think it's important that we get the community to understand that any one year's budget is in the context of a multi-year cycle, where we're going to have years where there's negative variance that was unplanned, that negatively impacts us, and that's why we have these fund balances to make up for those ups and downs within a given year. So I think this is great discussion that leads us to look at this year's budget, which we're forming now, in the context of a multiple year scenario, where our end objective is fiscal sustainability over the long haul. So I think this is great discussion that we want out of CFBAC in these forums. So with that, maybe Ms. Loughlin, you can get back to your slides.
Yes. To piggyback that, for 16-17, we're currently working on projections. For close of December, which were rough numbers that I start using, I actually start using the numbers before my staff has officially closed the books. They're actually just now closing them this week on an official cycle. So I start pulling those numbers on January 2nd. I don't wait for them because I'm eager to see where we are. So there's always a little bit of variance in there too, as journal entries are made and some expenditures have to be adjusted for with bank reconciliations and such. But right now, for December 31, as of December 31, we're looking at between 2.71 and 3.2% unassigned. That's the 4% where we landed 3.6% end of close of last year. So that's the range we're looking in right now, and the next slide I'll go into the variables that are kind of affecting that range as to why we do have a 0.5% swing on that. Total ending fund balance projected is to go down $4.5 million. And obviously this is all subject to change as we go through the year and we start getting further on with our expenditures and conversations with our buildings and trying to pin these numbers down as close as possible. So for 2017-18, the fund balance numbers in this year are affecting next year's budget. This year we could potentially, we don't know for sure, receive $500,000 of revenue from BK Elwood. That is when permits are issued by board resolution from the town of Huntington. There were talks, and we have our council tracking this for us, but there were talks that they're getting close to that point. I know at our last meeting here, it was raised that people had heard that it was kind of at a halt right now. So we're not sure where that is. There's potential by June 30th, we get that money, our fund balance goes up because it's unanticipated revenue. We kind of remain at that lower point for fund balance. Revenue of $1.2 million in back aid is due to the district. We did receive an estimated timeline this year in August, but while we were closing out our books, we were finally able to get in writing from the state a timeline as to when those monies are going to be distributed. We've already started seeing those payments come in as per that timeline. We've gotten a small amount, it was about $25,000, but it's still it's the exact number that they told us in August we would be getting, and we did receive it. So we're hopeful that that schedule is accurate. I've had conversations with our auditors. We work closely with them when we do these projections. We bounce ideas off of them as to whether or not we can use any of that as revenue for next year. Can we budget that revenue for next year? Where are we at with it? Their recommendation was not just yet. Let's have further conversations with the state to see if we can pin that in. Let's wait for the state aid runs to come out. Let's wait for the governor's proposal. There's a lot of factors that come into that game there, so we're not sure. If we end up not being comfortable enough to use it as a revenue point in the budget, and we do get it next year, again, more fund balance into our overall scheme. Yes?
Could you just elaborate, and if this was said in the previous meeting, I apologize, but, so what does this back aid do to the district? It's from the state?
It's due from the state. It's a combination. The bulk of it is building aid. Many years ago, if you did not file what's called a final cost report, when your projects are done and we have to file a final cost report detailing out all the expenditures and how we spent all those monies in order to start driving our aid on that project. If that wasn't filed by a certain point in time, you didn't receive your aid. You were cut off. Many, many years ago, that wasn't done for whatever reason may be here in this district. There was then a grace window that opened in about, I think it was in 2009, and my predecessor, Mr. Pastori, took advantage of that. He filed all of those reports on behalf of the district. He got all of them in, so now we fell into a queue. You're due all this money, $1.1 million in building aid, because we opened that grace period for you. We just can't tell you when we're going to give it to you.
I think the word queue is probably an overstatement in the sense that that leads you to believe that there's a sequential, logical flow of process. It's not that. You're somewhere, but it's not a logical progression that is easily understood. So, I think we got in.
But you're approved, you just don't know when you're going to get paid.
Correct, and it's not like they can tell you, okay, you're number 27, and the following year you've moved up to number 11. It was really an opaque, unclear process where you're approved, but so you think about trying to budget, absent that kind of visibility, very, very difficult.
But do you think it's going to be this, are you told it's going to be this year?
So the schedule we have, which is, we put that schedule actually in the financial highlights of our financial statements, which are online if anybody wants to look at them. You can't sleep at night and want to read them, have fun. But it's in one of the first pages, and that detailed schedule is there. And it just tells you year 2017, over $1 million will be paid to us. It says year 2017. We don't know if that will be in March of 2017 or in December of 2017. That's the unknown. The unknown too is whether or not they're going to have the funds to pay us it. So that's where we don't know if it's going to happen. We're very hopeful because we actually got it in writing with a schedule of payments, but again, there's a lot to be said. Just today we received an email advocating for the state to, there's over, correct me if I'm wrong, $4.6 billion in back aid to all school districts in New York State. And there was an advocating email we received today pushing the state to pay that. There were some lawsuits 2 years ago that were settled, and a lot of revenue came into the state as a result of that. And the educational organizations that we all belong to have been advocating for the state to take that unanticipated revenue and supply the school districts with money that is due to them. So, as I said, there's a variable here. We're hopeful. I don't think we'll get 1.2 million. I'm hoping we get 500,000, 700,000. But again, we won't know. So we're continuing our conversations with our contacts. When we finally get a name, we hold on to that name and that number, and we're constantly on top of them, hoping that we can get further information.
So Mrs. Laughlin, 2 quick points. If I look at the 500K from BK Elwood and the 1.2 million in back aid, 1.7 million is almost 3% of a $60 million budget. So when we talk about the challenges of managing tightly to a budget when the business office and the administrative team are challenged with that kind of variability, not an easy task. The second point would be, I think the district's administrative team has done a tremendous amount of work within the last 6 to 9 months to really put pressure on our legislators to provide greater transparency and specificity around the scheduling of when we could get some of that back aid back. Dr. Bossert specifically, Mr. Kaplan on his way out brought this up as a priority that we should focus on, and Dr. Bossert and the team have carried that forward on a daily and weekly basis to pursue greater visibility into when we're going to realize that historical revenue from back aid. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, the business office has been very rigorous in their pursuit of this back aid for a long period of time. And I did learn about the back aid that was due to the district by attending a public board meeting during the transitional time before my July 1 start date. And I put it down as a priority to follow up over the summer. And what I did was I met with our locally elected officials. I met with Senator Marcelino and Senator Flanagan and spoke to them very specifically about the back aid that was due to the district and how beneficial it would be if we were moved forward in that mess of a queue that exists. Coincidence or not, just a few weeks after we exchanged all the information with Senator Marcelino's office, we received notification of the state of the payment schedule. So I would tend to believe that it's probably not a coincidence, and I appreciate the efforts of our elected officials in having this back aid scheduled for receipt.
So to be, that's a variable. We're not sure. Maybe we'll get some of it this year. Maybe we'll get some next year. Maybe we won't get it for 3 years. So that plays into our fund balance projections that we're trying hardly to get as accurate as we possibly can.
I'm just curious, are you able to tell us, you mentioned that there was a schedule the first of August, around 25,000, just like the next few?
The 1.2 million, I think it was 1.1 million, they said will be paid in 2017, which is the largest portion of it. And then after that, it's kind of smaller amounts, 100-something thousand, another 50,000. And a lot of that is back aid on special education claims that were filed late, and it's kind of, that is, when they get to it, and they'll pay it. So the years later, the numbers are not as critical in our process as is this $1 million that they're saying we'll get in 2017.
Yeah, that timeline, Nikki, unfortunately does specify the calendar year in which we should expect to receive payment. And what further complicates financial management is our fiscal year is July 1. So calendar year 2017 prior to July 1 or post July 1. So that's why we're looking for some guidance from our auditors to say, when can we count this as revenue? Because it's not clear to us which fiscal operating budget will be receiving the payments within.
And for those of you that may know accounting, if you receive it within 6 months of the close of your books, you're supposed to accrue it and count it in the year that you just closed. So there's a lot of variables coming into play here. This money has not been accrued on our books. It has not been recognized as revenue because we have no idea when we're getting it. It is not within a 6-month time frame. So it is sitting in deferred revenue. If you look at our financial statements, you'll see our deferred revenue number is very high. And as it comes in, that's when we're recognizing it. And that's why it then falls into unanticipated revenue for fund balance purposes. So another projection going into 17-18 is our transportation contract renewals. We renew that contract on an annual basis based on CPI. That CPI number is not released until June. I've already initiated conversations with our transportation company after discussions we had here in CFBAC last year, an analysis. We did a study with an outside organization that came in and took a look at our contract and our expenditures. And at this time, with conversations with the board and administration, we've decided not to go out for RFP. It would not be in our best interest at this time. However, we still need to make sure the vendor agrees with that. So I reached out, typically we don't reach out until May to do those contract renewals. In December, I sent them a letter asking if they would renew contract. I received a visit in my office from them saying, what is this? We've never gotten this so early. And I said, well, I'm trying to do my budget. We have, we're trying to stay fiscally stable, and this is a key. This is over $3 million of my budget that I need to know where it's gonna land. There was a change being proposed by legislation to follow the ECI instead of CPI, which is the Employer Consumer Index instead of Consumer Price Index. And ECI is released in January 31st, and that's the cost of living growth for an individual. That was recently vetoed by the governor. Benefit to us, it does not help the contractor. Benefit to us because that number is typically higher than CPI, so it would keep our contract costs low. Doesn't help the vendor, therefore we were kind of not sure where that was gonna go. I've been pushing them the past 2 weeks to get an answer to see where they were going, if they're willing to renew contract, or are we gonna be forced to RFP. Literally at 5 p.m. tonight, I got the email confirmation from them. They are rolling our contract over 1 more year on CPI, which we won't know CPI until June, but we can kind of start projecting that with where the averages are landing right now. So that's a plus. My first time sharing with the board as well. Haven't told them either. Literally found that out this evening. So we're in a good spot for transportation, which is really good for the budget. The other is we have some outstanding collective bargaining agreements. We have 3 contracts expiring. We've just settled almost all expired contracts. We do have 1, but it doesn't affect the general fund. The outstanding collective bargaining agreements coming up are teachers, our paraprofessionals, and our custodial staff. All expired June 30th of 2017. So we are just starting to enter into negotiations. We don't know how quickly that will go. We don't know how smooth. We don't know the dollar value. So projections are being made on assumptions that administration would like to see. So that's another variable we're playing with right now going into that budget cycle, which is very tough when the teachers are the largest portion, 200 employees in this district. So those are the variables we're playing with right now for 2017-18.
On the positive side of outstanding collective agreements, we have, during the course of this school year, settled the contract with the administrative unit, the clerical unit,
Teaching assistants.
and teaching assistants. We are near agreements, and we hope to propose something to the board shortly.
Sure, I just had a quick question. On the end of year unallocated budget reforecast that you did you take in more upside based on your end close the year prior? So there's a little more risk in that reforecast, or is it more? I know there's variability across the board.
For the projections for closing this year?
This year, yeah. Exactly.
We're being very conservative.
All right.
Yes. It does help that we settled some outstanding contracts. Those 3 contracts that are settled or in the process of being settled is helping us project those numbers a little bit more accurately, because if those were continuing to be outstanding, it does make the number fluctuate a little bit more. So our property tax levy cap, as we said, that is basically what drives our budget now. Years ago, we did expense-based budgeting. We now kind of do revenue-based budgeting. We find out what is our revenue, and that's a stagnant number, it's unnegotiable. What is that? And then that drives our expenditures, unfortunately, now. We don't know that number until a couple weeks from now. It is reported to the comptroller on March 1st, so it has to be done by that point. CPI is what drives that formula. We will receive that next week. January 20th is when that number gets released, and as soon as it's released, we all start plugging those numbers in. Every other aspect of that calculation has been received, except for building aid for next year, but we have received projections from the school aid specialty group that we do use. They have provided me with some projections based on our reports and that are available out there. So we have a rough draft of a number that we're kind of playing with right now. We're not releasing it because we don't know what CPI is coming in. They are estimating CPI right now to be about 1.14, 1.2, which is obviously much higher than the 0.12 we had last year. So that is on the positive. As I said before, ERS, TRS, the numbers did go down slightly, so there is no exclusion for that. We do have a capital exclusion that we still account for. That's your debt minus your building aid. So that's where the building aid number comes into play, and we'll kind of make that number move a little bit. We also use I think I have on the next slide. These are the components of the budget. The CPI are 2%, whichever is less, it will be less than 2%. Pilot payments in the current year and future year get added in and taken out. We do know those numbers, we actually have a schedule for years out. Tax-based growth factor is something that goes into play, and we actually received that quite early this year. We usually haven't, we got that number the end of November, I believe it was, which is probably the earliest we've gotten it since this law has come into effect. Unfortunately, our number did decrease. We are seeing a decrease in our property growth, and it's based on your June of 2016 assessments. So we don't have a say in that. It is how the town assessor develops the assessment values of the entire district, and that number is provided to us. And then again, the exclusions are TRS, ERS, and capital.
Carrie, if I may, one of the advocacy efforts that we're fully engaged in, both the legislative committee here and those throughout the state, is to lobby for the tax cap legislation to be a true 2%. Over the last number of years, we've had our mantra about eliminating the GEA. We were able to achieve that after years of effort. The new focus is, and it's hard to believe that we're actually advocating for this at this point, but to make 2% 2%. When the tax cap legislation was initially introduced, CPI was 3%, 3.5%, 4%. So the thought of the tax cap falling below 2 was not really at the forefront of thought when the legislation was enacted. Now that we've seen CPI as low as 0, for all intents and purposes last year, we would like to be able to have the stability of knowing how to budget, to know how to plan, and we're willing to say, let's let 2% be 2%. So those are the advocacy efforts taking place throughout the state. In my conversations with Senators Flanagan and Marcelino, they've been kind of mixed in their review of how they feel that may be received by the governor. We feel they'll be supportive of it within the Assembly and the Senate, but they are concerned that even with full support, it will be rejected by the governor because this is very, very popular landmark legislation that he introduced. The approval rating for the tax levy cap is over 80%, and what's interesting about that is, I think you know the percentage of our total population that's employed within the educational field. So even folks whose livelihoods depend upon what school budgets are able to produce as far as revenue are in favor of the 2% tax levy cap because of how it helps keep property taxes down. So you'll hear a lot of let's let 2% be 2% as our advocacy over the next few months. Our legislative group is involved in advocacy efforts in the coming weeks, including a march on Albany in the first week of March. But that's what we're hearing a lot about. And our budget process and the stress in this community, I think, would be greatly alleviated if that change to the legislation were to come to fruition.
So our upcoming meetings that we have scheduled is February 8th is our next meet. I'm sorry, that is wrong. I did not check that date. I will fix it as I said that. I noticed that. February 9th is a superintendent's forum. We're going to start that at 6 p.m. So this whole slide will be changed by tomorrow morning when we post it on the web. We're going to piggyback that forum to the budget workshop board meeting. It's going to be a very eventful evening. I please encourage you to join us still. The forum is, again, it's going to start at 6 p.m. It's going over the introduction of a bond. Facilities Committee for the past year and a half has been looking at a potential bond referendum to come forward to the public, and that is all driven off of our building condition survey that we do on it every 5 years. That's required. So we were just up for one. We did one last year. It was reported in November to the state, and as a result of that, a lot of your things that are falling apart are coming through. Our roofs are due for complete replacement. There's many things in there, and the focus is health and safety. That is a key. While there are some educational enhancements that we're looking at, the key of that bond referendum that we will be proposing is health and safety. So we encourage you to please come to that, get informed, have the conversation. It's an open dialogue with the superintendent. He will be introducing what the Facilities Committee has been working on, the potential punch list that they've developed at this point, which is a very rough draft, and go forward with that. That meeting will then piggyback into the budget workshop, which just happens to be on our schedule, the capital portion of the budget. That's the other 12% of the budget. That's going to go into operations, maintenance, and plan. And it's basically reviewing everything that the general fund can support. So it's a nice feedback of what we can support on a daily basis as to those larger projects that we can't support with the general fund. And the budget workshop will take place at 7:30 here. We have 7:08. Again, this whole slide's gonna be revamped. I apologize for that. Those changes actually we just made, so I do apologize that they're not correct right now.
We are avoiding a conflict with a fundraiser taking place at the high school. We do not want to step on toes and have parents have to decide who they want to support. And within the forum, I'll also be introducing a survey that will be going out to the entire community, both parents and residents, so we can get some feedback of what the community feels the priorities are as far as a capital bond. We certainly have a punch list that's been developed over a long period of time, working with engineers and architects. But we also want to hear the committee, from the community, what the wish list might be. So we will certainly put out a survey and assess the feedback from those who would like to attend the forum so we can make sure we are correctly prioritizing the way the community would like to see their dollars invested.
And to piggyback that, we're not looking to put a bond out in May. It is a process, it is a long process, it is not an over the night. There are still voting requirements and notifications and such, so the facilities committee is looking to propose a bond next fall, winter, between the months of October, December. That has not been determined, but that is the timeline that we're working under. So just to let you know, not to get it confused with the budget vote, the bond vote would be completely separate with that.
I just have a question about the bond and how it's included in this, because it was my understanding that some of our debt repayment is falling off. That's kind of why we're talking about a new thing. So how are those numbers in the budget projected for next year?
They actually don't take effect for 17-18 because we wouldn't be doing the vote until 17-18 school year. We actually wouldn't be effectuating a borrowing for 2 years out. The debt starts to fall off in the year 2022, I believe it is. So that's when we would be taking on the majority of our debt to kind of balance out. And the key to that is with your tax cap formula is where your capital exclusion is. So if we have all this debt falling off, we're overinflating our revenue that we can bring in from the taxpayers. So in order to keep that balanced and keep a steady pace, it's replacing that old debt with new debt to fix all the things that have gone wrong in the past however many years. So in 2022 is where we look to see the bulk of that fall off, and that's where the projections are coming in to actually start the borrowing. While we would do a vote in 2017, we wouldn't see projects starting to happen for at least a year out because there is such a process involved. SED approvals, legal, RFPs, bids, it's not an overnight thing, and projects would happen over the course of many years. So that's how that would play in. So it actually doesn't affect the 17-18 budget, but it would affect in future years.
But the increase, if the bond were approved in the fall, the increase would come before the debt fell off, or no?
No, well, that's the goal, is to time it,
So that
to time the projects and the borrowings so that there is a minimal tax impact to the community. Well, we can't say for sure there's no tax impact, because I really don't think that would happen. Our goal is to have a very minimal tax impact, because you would start borrowing slowly and increasing your debt as it's falling off, but the largest portion of your debt would come when the largest portion falls off. So what you do is you do a BAN, which is a bond anticipation note, and you borrow anticipating that in the future you're going to be turning that into a long-term bond payment. And that's how you'll stabilize the tax levy and the general fund budget.
But from a multi-year planning standpoint, if we were to actually wait for that debt to fall off, to then go out to the public and ask for a bond, we'd be years behind the ability to actually work with state and department to plan for projects. So that multi-year perspective for the community is going to be important in the context of what we're trying to do from an infrastructure standpoint, and also that financial planning in terms of when debt retires and how you manage the load over a multi-year strategy.
No, I got that. I just was wondering, I think it's kind of explained now, but I just was confused because I was assuming if the bond was passed, I mean, like our roofs, I don't think they can wait 5 years to be replaced, and that's probably the biggest bulk of our costs.
Correct. So, and that's where the timeline comes in, as once we develop the final punch list, it's how are we going to start implementing these projects? What is the time out for SED to do the approvals, which we've discussed in facilities committee? You know, some are 18 months, but some we can get done a little bit quicker if you're replacing in kind. So all of these questions, which we've had in facilities committee, we've had extensive discussions with the architects now, have been coming into those meetings. The superintendent's forum is the kickoff for the full public presentations. And we will start presenting more in depth with those type of scenarios. What's in-kind products? What is SED's timeline? How is it affecting the general fund budget, the debt, the building aid, all of those type of things? That's from February's meeting on now until the board sets a date for a vote. Should they set the date for a vote? is when we would continue those discussions. So February 9th kickoff, Superintendent Forum, 6 p.m. Piggybacks to the Budget Advisory Committee Board Workshop. Piggybacks to a board meeting for the month. Long night, but a lot of information being provided that night. And we're hopeful that everyone can please join us to have those conversations because they are very important to the facilities of the district and the education of our children.
And Mrs. Long, before you open it up to questions, one last point. So we talked a lot about variance and sources of variance and what things are hard to control. When I think about getting to a place where we're contemplating a bond to address significant investments in infrastructure, the longer you go without doing that, the bigger the potential risks that you're trying to manage. You're within the context of a year and try to fund out of your operating budget. So you mentioned roofs, right? If you have a major problem with a roof and you're trying to manage that variance within the context of your annual operating budget, very difficult. If you actually fix the core source of the problem with a long-term solution, now we've actually reduced a great source of intra-year variability that can cause the kind of variance that may confuse people about our ability to hit a number. So I think that's an important point when we think about those two things together. So with that, you want to open up for general questions?
Any other questions specific to budget? Beyond budget? Board, questions?
Oh, great job, thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you for the transparency. And
Again, it will be posted with corrected dates and my numbers I know are a little bit off from numbers that we literally changed today, and those will all be corrected and posted online tomorrow for the full community to take, as well as CFPC.
And I think just going back to Dr. Bosworth's opening comments relative to CFPAC and what we envision for it, I think we saw it tonight, this kind of back and forth dialogue, discussion around elements of our budgeting and multi-year financial planning is exactly what we're hoping for. So thank you to the members of CFPAC for being here, those that were here physically, those that were engaging digitally. This is exactly what I think we're looking for.
Carrie, can you just give the committee an idea of when they'll be receiving the line by
Sorry,
line?
I missed that I did have that on there. I
know you're
overlooked that.
closing the books out and trying to find.
Right, so we will be providing the CFPAC with a draft line by line prior to next budget meeting, which the February 9th meeting. When that draft presentation goes to that committee, that's when we will send you a draft budget. Keeping in mind it is a draft working document still, so the numbers you're seeing today will have changed up until that point. And even from when you receive it on whichever day we have it ready to give out to you, will change probably within hours of me sending it to you. At this point, the budget is a fluid document. It is literally changing hour by hour as we hold meetings with our staff, as we meet as administration, as we discuss information with the board and get feedback from vendors and all those such things. So it's very important to know that that is a working document, it's a draft document. The final presentation is when the board adopts the budget. The board is still having discussions, obviously, on budget and where they want to go. We're not honing in on that number, and that number won't be presented in final until I think it's our April 6th meeting, which is when we anticipate adopting the final budget. Just to piggyback too, when you had asked about state aid numbers, the governor typically does a press conference, the state of the state, in January. It's a little different this year. I actually had a panic attack the other day and went in running into Dr. Bosworth's office and said, oh my God, we missed it. Because I started seeing news reports that he's given a state of a state. And I've always sat with the superintendent and we watched it together to understand the educational impact and the budget impact that it's going to have on us. And this year he's floating around the state giving the presentation. And some are saying it's different presentations depending on the region that he's in. So he was in Long Island yesterday or 2 days ago, gave his presentation, but budget's not being discussed from what I understand in all the reports I'm reading. They're not being live webcasts like they used to be. So when people ask, is there any information on state aid and state budget, I feel like we're back where we were 2 years ago. When he had his conference, we sat and watched it and then got told, you're not getting numbers till April 1st. And we all kind of just said, what? I'm at that point again this week saying, what? You know, he's the governor, he has the right to do as he wishes, so that's how he's choosing to release his information this year. We're hopeful within the next 2 weeks, we start hearing budget numbers. Typically by mid-January, we have a draft budget run from the governor. It's called the Governor's Run, and it's run off of the November database. We diligently got all of our information into that database as accurate as possible so that we can get the most accurate numbers from him. Those numbers too continue to change as the House and the Senate start to look at them. They then negotiate the budget, and April 1st is when we get that final run. We do start working off of the governor's numbers. Typically, we start seeing numbers come in higher than that, except for the 1 year when we only got numbers in April. So it's again kind of one of those moments where we're saying what's happening, process is changing on us, and you know, it kind of ties our hands a little bit. We do projections as best we can with state aid numbers. We use our resources and our groups that we subscribe to help us with that. But I wish I had better information to say Governor's Run is coming next week after the State of the State. State of the State has happened 3 times already this week, I think, so I don't have an answer. I have an answer saying April 1st we should have an on-time budget, as we have had in 5 years now or so, and that's when we'll have final state aid numbers.
The governor has decided to go the other way with transparency.
Yes.
But it's interesting when you hear reports about what we should anticipate for aid, there's 2 schools of thought. Our local electeds have been saying last year's increases were historic in nature. It was the largest increase ever afforded to public education in the state. They have warned us not to expect similar increases this year and to hope for nominal increases along the lines of what we typically expect, 1 or 2%. The comptroller's office, however, has painted a very different picture of what the state can truly afford to do. And depending on which one you want to believe, is a great variance. So again, it makes our planning process very, very difficult. And the projections that we do receive to help us, guide us in the process, have also been somewhat widespread. So we're looking forward to seeing the governor's runs and then anticipating that the legislature will as they typically do, force some increases to his initial runs, but at least we'll have a baseline.
Keeping in mind last year's increase was for full funding of GEA. Gap elimination adjustment is no longer existing, and that was partly why everyone saw such an inflation in state aid, is because everybody was made whole with that number, while we're still shorted money because it was taken away from us for so many years. We're happy that we got last year's taken away money back, but the advocacy now is foundation aid, is to make the formula run. If it runs, it is actually beneficial to us. It hurts some districts, but there's a hold harmless place in law right now that would protect those districts from losing money and having it taken away. But for us, it actually would benefit us, and we would see more foundation aid come through. So, you know, a lot of that's to be seen. That's the advocacy work right now of the superintendents, of the business officials, and all other groups. I believe the board association is also fighting for that. So, you know, we're starting now in our campaign months. We have meetings coming up often with legislators at various locations that we will be going to during the school day and on weekends to try to make sure we are all made whole with the monies that are due to us and that everything is fair. A large part is because Long Island typically gets shorted and the monies tends to go to upstate districts or to New York City. So, you know, we're all advocating as much as we can to make sure these formulas run how they were intended to run, and if not, then at least modify them slightly so that they can work for today's world that we're living in. We're hopeful we get some state aid runs by the end of this month, so that come February when we do another revenue update, we have a little bit more information. But in reality, we know April 1st is the number that we go off of, so we kind of play with the projections from now until then. Emery?
I just had one question. I know we were talking about how we were due some state aid before because we had missed the deadline to file our improvements.
Right.
Are there any other things like that that we have missed as a district in years past to missed a window, and is there a grace period?
Not that I'm aware of, which is why I had brought school aid specialists, they're consultants that come in and take a look at that for you. I brought them in 2 years ago, and by doing that, they did find some things, and they were able to retrieve aid on our behalf. They receive a percentage of that, they get 15%, but it was no cost to the district because it was found money. So they got when the revenue came in is when we paid them. I continue to bring them in on an annual basis just to take a look, make sure we're not missing anything. We're all human, and we're looking at a lot of things on a daily basis. We're overseeing many things within my office. All my staff are very overloaded with work. So they do come in and take a look at all of our aid categories. The most being special ed. They work with the special ed staff and my staff to make sure we're maximizing those dollars. They're looking at transportation aid to make sure we're maximizing the dollars there. And they're due to actually come in within the next month or so. They come in once the aid runs have been finalized. And at this point, I am not aware of any back aid that hasn't been filed for. We believe we've caught it all now at this point.
The good thing about that organization that comes in is kind of training the employees to take a better look at, or a different way to look at it, so that even though they're finding things that we may have missed, we'll start missing less and less as years go on.
They're showing us, as they find them, they show us what they found, how they found it, and what we can do to prevent it, which is why we received additional state aid last year, more than we had anticipated, because my staff has been trained now to look for things. Even just this year alone, when we filed our final reports and our final financials came out, and before that November database got pulled for the governor, we have our notes, and I have a sticky note sitting on my computer of what I need to check prior to that November run. We checked it, and because of that, we almost missed 5 children to be pulled in that database. They would have gotten caught eventually, but they wouldn't have been included in that state aid run from the governor should we get one, which is huge. That's a substantial amount of money. So that goes back to how do we try to fix projecting our fund balance as accurate as possible, and it's doing those processes. And I think that's why I think we're on the right path. We've been utilizing every resource we have possible and available to us to make sure that we're capturing everything we can possibly do. So as a result of that double check, we were able to capture 5 more students that are able to drive money back to us. And hopefully that aid run will now reflect that. We got excess cost aid in quicker last year because school aid specialist has trained my staff as to how they need to be filing these reports, what I need to be looking at when they file those reports. So we're on the right path. It's just going to take some time to get it to be 100% accurate, which I don't think we'll ever get to 100% accuracy, obviously, as you're doing projections, but we'll get as close as we possibly can.
Great, Mrs. Laughlin, thank you, the business office and the entire administrative team for a robust discussion around the administrative component of our budget as we begin our workshop sessions to progress through all components of the budget. With that, we'll shift gears. I think our next discussion item is Cold War Veterans Exemption.
Ms. Laughlin's been talking for about 90 minutes, so I'll give her a head start on this one. The board has previously taken action to expose some veterans that live in our community to some tax breaks that the law affords them for having served our country. And I think the board was very prudent in their decision to do that. We've become aware of another exemption that's been made available to a specific group of veterans that's considered the Cold War veterans exemption. And this would be available to a Cold War veteran, spouse of a veteran, or he unmarried surviving spouse of a deceased Cold War veteran, and can receive a partial tax exemption from the portion of the school district real property tax. Those people are defined as a person, male or female, who served on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces during the time period between September 2nd, 1945 and December 26th, 1991, and was discharged or released therefrom under honorable conditions. So we did our search of our Huntington Town Tax Assessor's Office to realize that there are 26 Cold War veterans living in the Elwood School District and 3 disabled veterans that would qualify for this exemption. So the point of bringing this for discussion tonight is to see if the board has an interest in the administration bringing forth a resolution to authorize the town of Huntington to create this exemption for those veterans living within our community. What we do not have a definitive number on is the additional costs that all of our other taxpayers would have to take on because of these veterans being exempt from a portion of their payment. The revenue, the amount of taxes we collect doesn't change, the way it's distributed does. So everyone would pay a slightly increased portion of their tax bill to make up for a lesser tax bill paid by the veterans who might apply for this exemption. We don't have that exact figure today. I will get it for the board in time for the board to consider the resolution, but I can tell you with almost certainty it would be less than $1 per household. We've looked at other districts in the area and their calculations for the veterans that serve within their communities. We've seen variations between 45 cents per household to 50 or 60 cents per household. So I'm saying under $1 as a grand projection of what it might be. And if the board is interested in pursuing this, we'll get a real cost available to you prior to the meeting on the 26th, where we place the resolution on the agenda. For the board's purposes, we've given you a draft resolution of what that might look like if you are interested in availing this opportunity to veterans living within our community, as you have done in the past.
Dr. Bosser, thank you for walking us through that information on the Cold War exemption and giving Mrs. Laughlin a break. I'll pull the fellow trustees as to whether they have interest in pursuing this.
I'm in full support.
Me as well. So you have unanimous support from the board for the district to pursue putting this on our next.
So let it be done, and I will make sure that we have accurate numbers on the number of potential veterans that may be affected, and then if they all do avail themselves of that opportunity, what the potential impact is on our homeowners. But again, I feel very comfortable in saying it will be less than $1 per year per household.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to our residents' remarks. Remarks are limited to items voted on or discussed at this business meeting, this actual workshop, right? A working session. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves and any organization they represent at the meeting. Comments should be kept as brief as possible. It may not exceed 3 minutes. I will keep the clock here, consistent with Board Policy 3452. Public discussions of matters relating to staff, students, or others at which the reputation's privacy, right to due process could be in some way violated is strictly prohibited. Are there any residents' remarks? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn the Elwood Public School working session of the Board of Ed and Budget Workshop number 2? Motion by Mrs. Freed, seconded by Mrs. Weiss. All in favor? 5-0. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, residents in attendance. Both of you.